how did the idea of Tracxn kickstart?
So not a lot of people know that Tracxn was actually started in US first. India can also produce a large data platform, and that's our endeavor to actually build a large global data platform out of India.
How is Tracxn incorporating AI?
We have been a tech-first company from day one. At the back end, we actually track more than 700 million entities.
The listing was a pretty silent listing.
Despite expectations of a muted listing, it listed at about 83. I'm talking about Tracxn Technologies.
If you see the timing of the listing, this was in 2022. Now the worst year for getting listed. Once you feel that the business is stable, it's great to get listed. When we were private, we had about 30 shareholders. Today we have 90,000 shareholders. It's not an exit, it's a starting of another journey.
How different is an average Indian entrepreneur to an average entrepreneur in the States?
US has been the hub for innovation for quite some years. So India has actually been like a back office for a lot of large data companies.
How do you handle, say, competition from players like Crunchbase being one of them?
In our case, in fact,
have there been chats and talks where you have sensed that there's an underlying tone asking about family or husband or kids? Barely 4 years into kickstarting her professional career, Neha Singh started her own venture, Tracxn Technologies Limited, and then scaled it to an IPO in less than a decade. Many argue that the listing was maybe wrongly timed. However, 2 years since the listing, we asked Neha what gets her excited about Tracxn and how has life changed post-IPO. Welcome to a fresh new episode of The Hot Seat by AIM Media House, where we speak to Neha Singh, co-founder and CEO of Tracxn. In the conversation, let's find out Tracxn's story of going public, Neha's journey of reaching her first IPO, and how does a ringside view of the world's startup ecosystem look like. So brace yourselves and let's begin. Hello there, Neha. Welcome to Hot Seat by AIM Media House. How are you?
I'm doing good. Excited to be here.
Lovely to hear that. Very successful entrepreneurship journey. We will definitely talk about that. But before that, we also want our viewers to get to know the person that Neha is. So if you can tell us a little about the growing up years, how was that like as a student and what led to the kickstart of the career?
So I'm born and brought up in Bombay. Grew up in a colony called BARC, Bhabha Atomic Research Center, colony. It is different in a sense that nearly half of your kids' parents are scientists.
Oh, wow.
So it is a very academically oriented place
Of
that
course.
that you've grown up in. My undergrad was in IT Bombay, and so I wanted to not leave Bombay, so I only applied to IT Bombay, and so I did that in computer science. And my first job was BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and then Sequoia Capital. Right, so my first two jobs were actually in Bombay, and when I was in Sequoia, I was actually investing in the private markets, right, primarily in India. And then I did my MBA from Stanford, so I moved to the Bay Area, spent a few years there, and interestingly, we also started Tracxn out of there. So not a lot of people know that Tracxn was actually started in US first, and all our initial customers in terms of venture capital funds, private equity funds, and corporates were all in the 10-mile vicinity of the Stanford campus. So that happened, and obviously now, based out of Bangalore, because we have our large setup of nearly 700 member team, out of Bangalore.
Now I want to ask you that how did the idea of Tracxn kickstart?
Right. No, that's a great question. So the idea of Tracxn was born when I was an investor at Sequoia Capital. Right. So at Sequoia Capital, as a venture capital fund, what you used to do is basically invest in startups. So there are interesting companies that you would have, and you would invest in various stages of those startups. And as an investor, I realized that you used to spend so much time in finding out about interesting companies.
Correct.
Right. So if you look at public markets, the parallel. You don't have to spend time in figuring out who's listed, who's not listed. There are about 5,000 companies listed in India, and that you have the list, handy. Imagine investing in public markets where you don't have that list of companies handy, right? That's how private market investing is. For instance, if you want to invest in, say, D2C brands, you're always looking at, from various channels, plus you're also looking at, which brands are advertising, which brands hoarding am I seeing, right? And that is your source of lead gen a lot of times. Or you'd ask your batch mates about, is there any interesting startup in your batch? right, in your IT batch, in your undergrad batch, or in MBA batch, right, that any of your friends are starting up. So we realized that, even private market, as it becomes larger, it'll also have platforms like Bloomberg for the private market, which will just make the whole ecosystem of investment much more efficient, right? And we thought that we could build a global platform in this space. And that's how we started. So we really wish that a platform like this existed when we were starting as investors.
And then you made it yourself.
Yes.
Somebody who's an industry outsider or say class 6 student, if you have to explain to a class 6 student in short, what is Tracxn and what does it do?
Tracxn is a private market intelligence platform. So our customers include private market investors, which are your venture capital funds, private equity funds, and large corporates. Investors primarily use it for finding out companies for their private market investing, and corporates use it either for their M&A, for their acquisition deals, or their innovation teams who are looking at new age products. So essentially, it's a platform for them. And, right from the entire spectrum, right from sourcing to doing diligence to tracking emerging trends in the sector, we help you do everything, right? So anyone who's looking at private markets would find a platform very useful.
When Tracxn started, how did you get your first funding check? What was the story of that?
Two parts to that. So one is, we were starting in US and I was a student in Stanford. And interestingly, our initial set of customers were people that we interacted as students. So, there were funds which were probably, very close to the campus. And, there are partners that we sort of ended up working with. So these were sort of the initial investors that we ended up interacting. So in Stanford, we actually got incubated in Lightspeed, which is a program that they have with the top universities, right? So, and we actually spent the first 3 months sitting out of their office. But when we got the first term sheet from a fund in US, right? But when we had to, sort of incorporate the company to do that, we realized that this was 10 years back. We realized that actually India will be a great place to incorporate the company over here. Because, eventually if the company becomes successful, we can actually think about listing in India. So, people ask us, when is the first time we thought about listing? And interestingly, that was when we were incorporating the company because, India listing would have been not possible if you have not been incorporated in India, right? So that is the choice that we had initially. We had got the term sheet from an investor in US, but we eventually decided to not take that and incorporate the company in India because we thought, if wherever it happens, we didn't know that it'll happen the first 10 years, but whenever that happens, that'll be a great outcome for the company and to continue to sort of build that. So that's why we incorporated the company over here. So, so the first round that we then eventually raised was, from friends and family, from sort of founders that we had sort of worked with. So this included founders of Flipkart, Sachin Bansal, Binny Bansal, founders of Delivery, Sahil, and a few of our people that we had sort of known, earlier, that we raised like an angel check.
You guys started in the States and now working out of India. You guys cater to more than 50 countries. So it's had a great journey in the first decade and a little more. What do you think makes Tracxn important for the global startup ecosystem?
If you look at the traditional data companies, right? So India has actually been like a back office for a lot of data, large data companies. So even if you look at the public market data companies, right? India has been the back office for a lot of these ones. And, and it has now good talent, right? And it's possible to now, based out of India, being able to sell to customers globally, right? So with that in place, we think that India can also produce a large data platform, and that's our endeavor to actually build a large global data platform out of India. So today, just to give some stats, more than 65% of our revenue is outside India, wow, right? And we have customers from over 50 countries. And when we are working with funds, say like in Germany or in UK, they're typically looking at local German-based companies through the platform. Right? So even in the platform today, we track more than 3.5 million companies, and these are global companies. So that has been, the reach that we have built in the last 10 years, and hopefully, that becomes more deeper in the years to come.
The fact that Tracxn is listed in India serves companies across the world, and you guys listed on a comparison basis pretty early into the journey of the company. So what led to that? What made that happen?
One of the aspirations of a lot of people, founders who are starting up, is that, maybe in some point in time in the journey of the company, you'll get listed, right? Essentially, if you end up, raising like a venture capital round, you have typically two routes, right? You either do an M&A or do an IPO. If you want to continue to build the company, right, then IPO is actually the way to do that. The initial aspiration that some point in time, through in the journey of the company, you'll probably get listed. When we look back, that's something that we are proud of, that we were able to sort of do that in the first 10 years. When we had started preparing for IPO, so we were cash flow positive. So we had turned cash flow positive. That's when we actually started preparing for the IPO, because that is what we had seen when we were investors, that, the public markets like sort of profitable stories, like the fact that, you have increasing bottom line, right? That trajectory, once you have achieved, then you can actually, start the process. And the first year after getting listed, we were also like PAT positive, like bottom line positive. And since then, it has been increasing bottom line. Right. So I think a few things sort of worked out, and that is when we thought it's a good time to start preparing. And thankfully for us, it happened, in the, like when we filed, within the first like 12 months when we got the approval. So thankfully we were able to sort of, get listed.
The story behind the listing is very interesting. It's a very aspirational one as well for young entrepreneurs out there. But the listing was a pretty silent listing. There was not a lot of shosha made around that. So what was the reason behind that, if you can talk us through?
If you see the timing of the listing, this was in 2022, which was probably one of the worst year for, getting listed.
Why is that?
So 2021 was the boom year.
Yeah.
Wherein you had all the large listings, you had Zomato probably, getting listed initially, and then you had all the other companies, Paytm, etc., get listed. And at the end of 2021, the interest rate were increased. And since then, the market had started falling, right? And 2022 was probably one of the worst years for, if you look at the listing, right? So LIC IPO happened at that year, and Delivery IPO happened, that year. And a lot of the companies who had got the approval could not, hit the market at that time. So a lot of the DRHP, approved DRHP sort of expired. And even if you look at, great companies like Delivery, it's not just that the number of IPOs were lesser, the subscription was also lesser, right? Like even for them, like, it's less than 2x, whereas if they were to, come out in a great market, obviously that would have been much, much higher, right? So that was probably one of the, I would say, tough markets for IPO, because of the fact that the interest rate had increased at that time quite substantially, and the markets had sort of falling, globally, and investors were sort of in wait and watch mode. That was probably one of the reasons that very few IPO'd happen that year, and we were lucky that we could actually get listed. I think one of the reasons was that we probably had the book built earlier. So 2020, before we got the approval, we had done the roadshow, and then we had got the book built earlier. And it was due to the fact that most of the investors who had committed then actually continued, in being the IPO anchor investors, and that was one of the reasons that we could probably also, get listed. So that happened. But I think great to have had now nearly 2 years. We'll be completing post listing.
When the post listing happens, now in the phase post listing, do business decisions change a bit because now you are looking at the public market as well?
So that's one of the key questions, that, how does life change after IPO? Does that impact what are the decisions that I can take in the business? The answer from our experience is no. So which is a great thing, that the public market investors are also cognizant about the fact that, how you think, it's not just about quarter to quarter, but what are you doing now for the long term? So there's a mix of investors. There are some investors which are probably, more liquidity driven and, more thinking about quarter and quarter. But most of the investors that we have actually met are actually similar to sort of the private market investors. They're thinking about the business on the long term, right? So, so a lot of the decisions that you end up taking, even if it is, it increases, for instance, cost in the short term, but on the long term, you think that it will give you a lot of growth. If you're able to also convey that story, I think people are on board with that.
According to you, what would be the differences between private markets and public market?
Once you feel that the business is stable, once you feel that the business can generate profit, and it should be ideally linear one way, it's great to get listed. The second thing I also say to founders is that it's not an exit, it's a starting of another journey. So don't think about IPO as an exit, right? most of the founders, successful founders, listed founders who are there in India have actually continued to run their company for decades, right? Even after getting listed. So, once you're starting to get listed, you'll probably end up running your company for the next, say 20 years or so, 20, 30 years. So it's actually the beginning of the next journey. If you're private, you'll probably be ending up meeting your customers every now and then. If you're, say, like a consumer company, when you are listed, you'll end up meeting your shareholders. So you'll probably have your shareholders in your apartment complex all around, wherever you go, and just meeting them and hearing from them that they have actually invested, sort of their savings in your company, it just makes you feel even more responsible, I would say. So I think that's one subtle difference which is there. When we were private, we had about 30 shareholders. Today we have 90,000 shareholders. So that's immense level of responsibility that you also feel that, now you have to sort of make money for so many people.
How is Tracxn incorporating AI in its day-to-day services?
Yeah. We have been a tech-first company from day one, right? Even if you look at the background of both of us founders, like both me and my co-founder, we are both undergrad in computer science, across different IITs, but we are sort of tech people first, and then we obviously were investors in our later avatar. Our platform today, at the back end, we actually track more than 700 million entities, right? This is essentially all the domains, etc., which got listed, right? Because when you're talking about tracking the private markets, the set of universe of companies is like huge.
Correct.
Right? Lot of projects on generative AI being across our organization, right? So it's not just the tech team or the product team which is doing it, right? The data teams are doing it. The analyst team is doing it. So every team is actually having different projects using generative AI today, because I think that is the power of the models, right? It has, even as a business user, you can actually leverage that, right? So I think that is something that I see across the org, and I'm really excited about it. And just a testimony to the fact is that, if you look at our team size, in the last 5 years, though the amount of data that we would have processed would have, increased by more than 10x or, multiple times, I would say, the team size has broadly remained in the same range, right? A lot has to do with automation.
How often do you get asked questions on work-life balance? And have there been chats and talks where you have sensed that there's an underlying tone asking about family or husband or kids? So how often has that happened?
I think women in general go through a lot of sort of interruptions, I would say, in their career, right? Like you have childbirth, which is, wherein for a few months you probably have to give a lot of time to your kid. And then obviously, you have, everyone wants to have like a good, family life, in a sense that, you need to have good food, everything should be, in place, etc. Right? So that is probably one of the key things that people have as an hygiene, especially more, I would say in the women leaders. And in a lot of our sort of closed door conversations that we have, what is there? I think that is one of the questions that people have. So I think this is an important thing that, that needs to come up in conversation about, how you're able to manage both your personal life for you to be very effective in your professional life.
Women founders and entrepreneurs should invest in fitness. If you can elaborate on that.
This is something that I would have not felt 10 years back when I was, early in my career, because, at that time, obviously, everything, you probably have the horsepower to do everything, right? What I've realized over the years, and I also having seen the career trajectories of a lot of people, I've realized that if you have to continue to be successful for, 1 decade, 2 decade, 3 decade in your 20s, 30s, 40s, right? If you have to continue to be good, if you have to continue to be able to deliver to your full potential, and if you have to continue to be good leaders who are leading sort of teams, you have to be physically fit to be mentally fit, right? And I think my commitment to fitness has probably increased a lot more, say after getting listed.
Wow.
Right? Because
what was the connection?
So after getting listed, I think, your trajectory for the next 20 years is sort of there, right? Now you're not thinking about, okay, do I need to exit after like a few years, or, thinking about it. Right now, that, now I'm like on a treadmill. Now you have to, you have to just keep delivering what you have promised for the next, 20 years.
All right. How do you handle, say, competition from players like Crunchbase being one of them and other competitors?
Right. So in any business that you would do, you will definitely have competitors, right? and if you don't have competitors, probably you have to worry about, what are you doing that, it's probably no one else has sort of saw that opportunity. But anything interesting, on a global scale that you are, doing, you will have competitors. In our case, in fact, it was a more vertical industry, I would say. So the number of competitors globally are not like, dozens as you would have it in a horizontal, like HRMS space or, CRM space. But they are only about, just a handful, like a single digit, number of players which you have. Having a few competitors right now just keeps you, very much on your toes, that, you're there and there's, this large opportunity which is for you to take.
You mentioned in 2021, when the legit boom happened for startups and IPOs and a lot of investment coming in, and then that went down the next year itself in 2022. Have you seen, would you say that the shift in the market has happened and it is finally getting better for startups?
For sure. So I would say the last 2 years were probably one of the lowest that the private market ecosystem has seen in the last decade, right? And if you look at a lot of stats, to give an example, how many, the total funding, it was down 80% from the peak. Another example, which is more relatable, is the number of unicorns which are getting created, right? So to give you an example of a peak, right, 2021, there were more than 40 companies which became unicorn, which means that they crossed $1 billion valuation for the first time in the private round, right? From high of 40 to last year, that number was 2, right?
Wow.
So most of the stats that you see is actually, more than 80% down from the peak. So for private market, this was like a 2008 moment, right? From all the funding and everything. The good news is that, that is behind us. The bottom is behind us. And now the thing seems to improve. So in terms of a lot of stats that you're seeing in terms of just the funding. So I think the funding is still, down more than 50% from the peak. But I think the trajectory is looking positive. Till even 3 quarters back, there was a decline that was happening every quarter. So that has stopped. That has sort of plateaued, and then, it seems to be going uptick. So that's good news. I think it'll still probably take 1 or 2 quarters for it to, recover fully. But I think you're seeing a lot of green shoots, especially in the early stage. You're seeing that recovery already happen for the last 2 quarters. In the later stage, hopefully that should happen in the next, 1 or 2 quarters.
When we're talking about big funding coming in, when we look at the states, I don't just want to give the example of the enormous funding that OpenAI got, because it's arguably the biggest player, 6.6 billion. So that is one example, but a lot of heavy funding happens in the states when it comes to the startups there, as compared to that kind of funding, or even close to that kind of funding, is not really happening in India. You've worked in both the countries, you're now major players in both the countries and 48 more. Why do you think that is?
So US has been the hub for innovation for quite some years, right? If you look at the stats, US accounts for, nearly 50% of the entire funding which is raised globally. India today accounts for anywhere between, 7 to 10% of the overall funding, more in the later stage, over there. But that's basically the difference of which exists between US, and India. There are a lot more sectors which are, much more deeper in US, I would say, like the whole AI infrastructure layer, I would say, as to give you an example, most of the companies that you see, are sort of valley based. Obviously, there are good examples of companies, even in Europe now, but I would say a lot of the talent that you see, is actually like Bay Area based, I would say, right? Silicon Valley based. And that you see for some of the other sectors as well, like, cybersecurity, or you take any of the other, infrastructure sectors, you continue to see that. The good news is that is changing to some extent, in a sense that, I think with the newer paradigm shifts happening, right, like AI being one of them, right? So obviously US was, great in internet, great in cloud, etc. They captured the entire shift that happened over there. Right now, one of the things is that, with AI being another game changer or another paradigm shift which is happening in the startup ecosystem, can the other countries actually, take advantage of that, right? So I think that is why you see, even from the governments, a lot of initiatives which is there, across other countries as well, to encourage, more companies going into that segment. attracting talent, into that segment. So hopefully, probably the years to come will show, how that happens. So anytime you have such a, change, which is, fundamental change, then you have the opportunity of more companies getting across the globe, I would say.
You mentioned that you're bullish about the great startup ecosystem culture that has been happening in the country since the last few years. Sam Altman said that the innovations that are being created in the States, Indian AI companies should not even try to match that, because they will not be able to succeed. So that was the statement that was made, and there was a lot of backlash that came in. What's your take on that?
So I think there was also a little bit of, the interpretation element, in that, and what he said and what people sort of interpreted. And that is why you see a lot more people not in support of that. 5 years back, if someone would have asked that, can an Indian company actually launch a rocket? The answer would have been no, because that talent pool, people did not think that existed.
But that's changed
right?
now.
That has changed. Right now, you have, Indian companies launching rocket, launching a whole fabricated rocket, launching satellites.
Absolutely.
And serving to enterprises globally.
And
right?
I'm so sorry to cut you, but just to that line, I wanted to mention that about a month and a half back, I was talking to the founder of the company called Skyroot. Skyroot is one of the first private companies to work hand in hand with ISRO, and their rockets were launched from ISRO's launch pad in Sriharikota. So that is what is happening in the country right now.
That is exactly correct. So for instance, ISRO has been instrumental in accelerating a lot of these things for a lot of space tech companies, right? Which has actually also contributed to a lot of companies, fairly young companies, you would say, to be able to achieve this kind of feat, right? So I think that is one of the things that people, actually underestimate. I think that each successful organization, how much impact they are able to have in the whole, in creating an ecosystem of that sector within India. Another example is like, the whole silicon fabrication, which is also being encouraged by government, right? So obviously, there are other countries which have been hub. Even a small step in setting up those things will probably go a long way in creating a very deep sort of expertise, I would say, or ecosystem of companies, within that in a country.
You worked in both of these countries. As a matter of fact, Tracxn started in the States. So if one has to ask you about the work culture that you came across in the States and in India.
So yes, there is a lot of difference, I would say, because of the fact that US is much more mature economy. So, even if you look at the talent pool, right, there are a lot more people who have seen companies scale globally, right? So if you're recruiting for any of the fields, like, your product managers or your marketing folks or your sales folks, right? In US, you have a lot more deeper, I would say, talent pool, which is there versus India. So what happens, any good company actually creates a whole I would say bunch of other companies, right? Like you talk about Mafia, which is there, right? Like you have PayPal Mafia. So PayPal has created a lot more founders, right? Similarly, in India, for instance, you have Zoho Mafia. So Zoho has created a lot of other SaaS companies, or Flipkart Mafia. So Flipkart has created a lot of consumer companies, right? People having worked in that company and then starting other companies, right? So every time you have a large company, it actually raises the bar in terms of the work ethic, work culture that people have seen. And then they take it one step ahead when they are starting a company and when they are setting up their whole org, right? So I think that has happened in US, probably earlier, but now I think that that has also changed in India because of the fact that, you have a lot more of these large organizations. So people have seen, what it takes you to build a global product. So once you've seen more examples, I think it just increases the work ethic. And now I think, in fact, Bangalore has very high work ethic as compared to, most of the cities globally. I think in Bangalore, more people have started to work from office, right? That work from home is, sort of very minimal, I would say. Most of the people are working from office. Versus if I talk to my friends in Bay Area, a lot of them are, still working only a few days, right? So I think that is one example of, how the culture has actually, become sort of very comparable. In some cases, much more serious, I would say, because of the fact that I think here people have seen success. Here people have seen what it takes to build scalable platforms. And once you have, people who have seen that, it just takes your, org culture to the next level.
I was reading, I think today itself, I don't know about the authenticity of the news that much, but I came across in a couple of platforms that Amazon in the States is completely planning to shut down work from home. and it is going to call everybody back to office, I think pretty late. And a survey was then conducted, and 73% of the employees are extremely unhappy about that.
That is correct, but I think that's the other difference between US and India as well. You know, in India, actually, for most offices, you will have more and more percentage of people coming to office than in US. I think it is also to do with the whole support infrastructure which, you know, sort of exists. To give an example, you know, like you have to leave your kid to school. Most of my friends in US, you know, don't have a school bus for their kids, right? So, you know, they will have to drop the kid if the school gets over. Like middle of the day, they'll have to go and pick them up, right? In India, you have that infrastructure. So you have like a, you know, school bus which seamlessly takes. You have other classes that your kids can, you know, be engaged in, and then, you know, once you're back to from work, you can actually pick them up, right? Or the bus drops, and then, you know, you're there to sort of attend to them, right? So I think that's the other, you know, subtle difference that I've also seen. I think you know, in US versus in India, that you know, after the whole COVID and the whole work from home which was there, you know, I think work from office or I would say the going away of work from home has happened more faster in India versus in US.
How different is an average Indian entrepreneur to an average entrepreneur in the States, and an average investor in India to an average investor in the States?
The same question 10 years back, if you would have asked me, my sense is that, you know, Indian founders, you resonated with the fact that the output will be like, the websites would be like IRCTC, which would be very cumbersome for the users to actually, you know, figure out and then do that. And versus, you know, in US, you will have people who are creating like, you know, very seamless, smooth products. I think right now it's equal. So I think right now, you know, if you look at the output of some of the companies in India, I think you would say it's probably one of the best products, right? Like simple things like we all use like Swiggy app, right? Or, you know, you would probably end up saying that, you know, that output is probably as comparable to in any of the platforms globally, or like a Myntra website that's comparable to a e-commerce platform globally. So I think that is, you know, that is one thing which has now become more equal in terms of the quality of just execution which these companies have been able to do.
You yourself are one of the examples that the company started their Tracxn, but then you guys are here now and operating in more than 50 countries. There are so many founders and entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, who have kickstarted. After college, they have kickstarted their entrepreneurs, doing great business. So what do you think caused the paradigm shift that now let's make in India and make for the world?
Right. So I think one thing which has changed, you know, across all these years is the depth of opportunities which is available in India. To give an example, you know, when, like again, you know, a few years earlier, like when my brother was graduating, you know, from IIT Bombay, the best salary on campus, he probably got, you know, one of the best salaries on campus, but still the Bay Area salary would be like, you know, maybe like 10 to 15 times higher when he was going there, right? That has changed right now because of the fact that there are a lot more opportunities right now in India. A lot of good companies are setting up their offices in India, right? So now you can actually afford to have, you know, good product that you're working with, like good quality work as well as good compensation, you know, while you're working in India. So if you want to work with any of the top like tech companies, right? Like Google has a large office in India, Microsoft has a large office, you know, in India. You can actually work on you know, quality, like global quality products being out of India, right? So I think that has changed just the number of opportunities and as well as the financial compensation of the opportunities in US versus in India. You know, that has become more and more equal, I would say. And that is why now you see a lot more people choosing to be in India, right? Versus, you know, having to migrate to another country and start afresh, you know, over there.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask you if you have to give one advice to a budding entrepreneur. Absolutely doesn't have to be a budding female entrepreneur or a budding male entrepreneur, just an entrepreneur who wants to start something of their own, build in the country, build for the world. What will that advice be?
My one advice to all the budding entrepreneurs is that it's a great time to start. So just do it. And second, do it in India. Right? I think right now you don't have the confusion of whether I should start in US versus in India. I think right now, if you are starting now for the next decade, India is at a very golden phase, I would say, both in terms of talent, in terms of investment opportunities, which is there, right? And hence the scaling opportunities, which is there for their company. I think, if you're thinking about startup, it's a great time to start and do it in India.
Why do you say the next 10, 20 years in India are the place to be?
I think it's a combination of a lot more things. So when you're building a world-class platform or a product, there are a few things which are very important, right? One is funding. That has become multiple times at what it was a decade back, right? Right now, you have all the large funds which are investing globally, also invest, large checks in India. So that's one which accelerates your journey. The second is just the talent pool. Again, so if you're 10 years back, you didn't have this talent pool who can create, this kind of product, this kind of UI, this kind of marketing, which sort of existed, which companies required. Right now, that has changed. Thanks to a lot of the MNCs, thanks to a lot of the companies, large companies scaled. Right now, if you want top-notch talent in product, in sales, you have that in India. So I think it's a combination of both funding as well as talent, which has now become much more deeper in India. And I think that is why you have the golden age in the next decade, that will just accelerate. Right? So I think right now, if you're starting, you're much better in starting in India versus starting in anywhere else. If you are obviously an Indian entrepreneur, you're familiar with the whole ecosystem, I think it's a great time to start here.
It's totally a great time to start. And one of the journeys was kickstarted by your company. Way back, startups were cool in 2013. Neha, it was such a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time here at Hot Seat by AIM Media.
No, thanks. It was awesome to speak to you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Guys, do write in the comments how did you find this episode of Hot Seat here at AIM Media House. And of course, do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more such content just like this. This is me, your friend Korak Roy. I will see you guys in the next podcast.